The letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, and I knew before opening it that my peaceful life in Riverside Estates was about to get complicated. I stood in my driveway, staring at the official HOA letterhead with its embossed logo, my stomach already churning. My name, Marcus Xander, was typed in bold letters across the top. The notice informed me that I had violated Section 7.4 of the Community Guidelines regarding exterior lighting standards and was being fined $500. According to the letter, my porch lights emitted a warm glow that deviated from the approved cool white specifications outlined in the Architectural Review Committee's handbook. I walked back inside my house in Phoenix, Arizona, absolutely bewildered. I had purchased this 3-bedroom ranch-style home 6 months ago, and everything about it had been standard. The previous owners had lived here for 15 years without any issues. The porch lights were the same fixtures that had been installed when the house was built in 2008. They were not some exotic modification I had made. They were simple sconce lights flanking my front door, the kind you could find at any Home Depot or Lowe's. My wife, Emma Everett, was in the kitchen preparing dinner when I showed her the letter. She wiped her hands on a towel and read it carefully, her expression shifting from confusion to irritation. "This is ridiculous," she said. "Those lights came with the house. We have not changed anything about the exterior since we moved in." "I know," I replied, running my hand through my hair. "I do not understand how this is even a violation. They are just standard warm white bulbs." Emma set the letter on the counter with more force than necessary. "Who even reported this? We have been here for half a year and now suddenly someone has a problem. That was a good question." I glanced back at the letter and noticed the signature at the bottom, Patricia Pemberton, HOA president. The name rang a bell. I had met her briefly at the community pool a few months back. She was a middle-aged woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and an air of self-importance that made every conversation feel like an interrogation. "We need to fight this," Emma said firmly. $500 for light bulbs that were already here. That is insane." I agreed. The next morning, I decided to call a licensed electrician to get a professional opinion. If the HOA was going to fine me based on some technical specification, I wanted documentation proving they were wrong. I found a well-reviewed local company called Desert Electric Solutions and scheduled an appointment for that same afternoon. The electrician, a friendly guy named Tom who looked to be in his late 40s, arrived right on time. He carried a toolbox and some testing equipment as I explained the situation. "So the HOA is saying your porch lights are not compliant?" Tom asked, already examining the fixtures. "Apparently they emit warm light instead of cool white," I explained. "But these lights came with the house. They have been here since it was built." Tom pulled out a small device and held it near the lights after turning them on. "This is a color temperature meter," he explained. "It will tell us exactly what kind of light these bulbs are producing." He took several readings, making notes on his phone. Then he unscrewed one of the bulbs and examined it closely. "These are standard warm white LED bulbs," Tom said. "They are running at about 3000 Kelvin, which is completely normal for residential porch lighting. In fact, this is what most manufacturers recommend for outdoor home fixtures. Cool white would be around 4000 to 5000 Kelvin, which is harsher and typically used for commercial spaces or security lighting." "So these are standard?" I asked, wanting to be absolutely clear. "Completely standard," Tom confirmed. "There is nothing unusual or non-compliant about these lights from a technical standpoint. They meet all electrical codes, they are energy efficient, and they are exactly what any homeowner would have installed. I can provide you with a written report stating this if you need it for your HOA." Relief washed over me. That would be incredibly helpful. Tom spent another 20 minutes taking photos, measurements, and additional readings. He printed out a detailed report right from his truck, complete with his license number and company seal. The document clearly stated that the porch lights at my address were standard residential fixtures operating within normal parameters and met all relevant safety and building codes. Armed with this evidence, I decided to attend the next HOA board meeting, which was scheduled for Thursday evening at the community center. Emma wanted to come with me for support, but she had a work commitment she could not miss. I told her I would handle it and keep her updated. Thursday evening arrived quickly. I walked into the community center carrying a folder with Tom's report, photos of my porch lights, and copies of the original building permits from 2008 that I had obtained from the county. I was prepared to present a clear, logical case. The meeting room was set up with rows of chairs facing a long table where the board members sat. Patricia Pemberton occupied the center seat, flanked by 4 other board members whose names I did not know yet. About 20 other residents were scattered throughout the room, apparently there to address their own concerns or simply observe. Patricia called the meeting to order at exactly 7 o'clock. She had the kind of voice that carried authority, even when discussing mundane topics like landscaping schedules and pool maintenance. After covering several routine items, she reached the section for homeowner complaints and concerns. I raised my hand. Patricia's eyes found me, and I detected the slightest hint of annoyance in her expression. "Yes, Mr. Xander," she said, consulting a sheet in front of her. "I see you are on the list. Please come forward." I walked to the front of the room, feeling the eyes of the other residents on me. I introduced myself formally and explained that I was there regarding the violation notice I had received about my porch lights. "Ah, yes," Patricia said, not even needing to check her notes. "The warm lighting issue. Your porch lights are emitting a warm glow that does not comply with our community standards for exterior lighting. All porch lights in Riverside Estates must use cool white bulbs to maintain uniformity and aesthetic consistency." "I understand that is what the notice says," I replied calmly. "However, I have brought documentation from a licensed electrician that confirms my porch lights are completely standard. In fact, they are the original fixtures installed when the house was built in 2008. I handed copies of Tom's report to Patricia and the other board members. She glanced at it briefly, barely reading the content. "Mr. Xander, it does not matter what an electrician says about whether the lights are standard. What matters is whether they comply with our community guidelines. The Architectural Review Committee has clearly stated that cool white lighting is required. But these lights have been here for 17 years, I countered. The previous owners never received any violations. Why am I suddenly being fined for something that has existed since the community was developed?" One of the other board members, a man with graying hair whose nameplate read Robert Chen, spoke up. "Has there been a recent change to the lighting guidelines that would affect existing fixtures?" Patricia's jaw tightened slightly. "The guidelines have always required cool white lighting. We are simply enforcing them more consistently now." "May I see a copy of the specific guideline that mentions light color temperature?" I asked. Patricia gestured to another board member, a woman named Susan who appeared to be the secretary. Susan flipped through a thick binder and found the relevant section. She read aloud, "Section 7.4. All exterior lighting must be appropriate for residential use and must not create a nuisance for neighbors. Lighting should maintain the community's aesthetic standards." I waited, but she did not continue. "Is there more?" I asked. "That is the section," Susan confirmed. but it does not specifically mention cool white or warm white," I pointed out. "It just says the lighting must be appropriate for residential use and not create a nuisance." My electrician's report confirms that warm white bulbs are standard and appropriate for residential use. Has any neighbor actually complained that my lights are creating a nuisance? Patricia's expression hardened. The board has the authority to interpret and enforce the guidelines as we see fit. We have determined that uniform cool white lighting is necessary for maintaining community standards. Your fine stands. You have 30 days to change your bulbs and pay the penalty, or it will increase to $1,000. I felt my frustration building, but I kept my voice level. This seems arbitrary. If the guideline does not specifically require cool white lights, and my lights are standard fixtures that have been here for nearly 2 decades, on what grounds am I actually in violation? On the grounds that the board has said so, Patricia replied tersely. This meeting is not a court of law, Mr. Xander. We have rules and residents are expected to follow them. Next item on the agenda. I stood there for a moment, stunned by the dismissiveness. Robert Chen looked uncomfortable, and I noticed another board member, a younger woman named Kelly, frowning at the exchange. But no one challenged Patricia's ruling. I returned to my seat, my folder of evidence feeling useless in my hands. Several other residents gave me sympathetic looks. After the meeting concluded, Robert approached me in the parking lot. "I want you to know that I think Patricia's handling of this was unfair," he said quietly. "But she has a lot of influence on the board, and most decisions go through her first. My advice would be to comply for now and then work to change the guidelines through proper channels." "So I should just pay a $500 fine for doing nothing wrong?" I asked. Robert sighed. "I am not saying it is right. I am saying that fighting Patricia head-on rarely works. She has been HOA president for 6 years and takes any challenge to her authority personally." I thanked Robert for his honesty, though his words did little to ease my frustration. When I got home and told Emma what had happened, she was livid. "This is abuse of power," she said. "There has to be something we can do." Over the next few days, I did research on HOA law in Arizona. I learned that homeowners associations did have significant authority, but they were not above the law. Their rules had to be consistently enforced, clearly written, and applied fairly. The fact that my lights had existed without issue for 17 years, and that the guideline did not specifically mention color temperature, suggested that Patricia was overreaching. I also discovered that Arizona had specific statutes protecting homeowners from arbitrary fines. I decided to write a formal appeal letter to the board, citing these statutes and requesting a hearing with all board members present, not just Patricia. I sent the letter via certified mail and waited. A week later, I received a response. The board agreed to a hearing, scheduled for the following Thursday. However, the response also stated that the fine would still apply unless I could demonstrate clear evidence that my lights were in compliance. I spent the week preparing even more thoroughly. I contacted Tom the electrician again and asked if he would be willing to attend the hearing to testify. He agreed. I also printed out the Arizona revised statutes related to HOA governance, highlighting sections about consistent enforcement and clear guidelines. I even found photos from the real estate listing when I bought the house, clearly showing the warm porch lights, and cross-referenced them with photos from older listings going back to 2010, all showing the same fixtures. Emma took the evening off work to come with me this time. We arrived at the community center 15 minutes early. Tom was already there, carrying his equipment. I introduced him to Emma and we went over the key points we wanted to make. The hearing began at 7. This time, All 5 board members were present, and Patricia had a more formal demeanor. She acknowledged that this was an appeal hearing regarding my lighting violation. I presented my case methodically. I showed the photos demonstrating that the lights had been unchanged for years. I had Tom explain the technical aspects of the lighting and why warm white was standard for residential use. I cited the Arizona statutes regarding fair enforcement and pointed out that the guidelines did not contain specific language about color temperature. The guideline is vague and open to interpretation, I concluded. I believe my lights meet the stated requirements of being appropriate for residential use and not creating a nuisance. No neighbor has complained. The lights are standard. This fine is not justified. Patricia listened with a tight smile. When I finished, she leaned forward. Mr. Xander, I appreciate your thoroughness, but you are missing the fundamental point. The Architectural Review Committee has the authority to establish and interpret aesthetic standards. We have decided that cool white lighting is the standard for this community. Whether or not the guideline explicitly states this is irrelevant, we are clarifying it now. But you cannot retroactively enforce a clarification, I argued. That is like changing the rules after the game has started. Kelly, the younger board member, spoke up. I actually think Mr. Xander has a point. If we are going to require specific color temperatures, we should amend the guidelines formally and give residents reasonable notice. Fining someone for not following a rule that was not clearly stated seems problematic. Patricia shot her a sharp look. The rule was always implied by the term aesthetic standards. Implied is not the same as explicit, Robert added, backing Kelly up. I move that we waive the fine and establish a grace period for any residents who currently have warm lighting to transition to cool white if we decide to make that a formal requirement. I second that motion, Kelly said immediately. Patricia's expression turned icy. We need to maintain consistent standards. If we waive this fine, we set a precedent that residents can argue their way out of violations. Or we set a precedent that we are fair and reasonable, Robert countered. A vote was called. Robert, Kelly, and another board member named Michael voted to waive my fine. Patricia and Susan voted against it. The motion passed 3-2. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Emma squeezed my hand. Patricia looked furious but maintained her composure. The fine is waived, she announced coldly. However, Mr. Xander, I expect you to change your bulbs to cool white within 60 days, once we formally update the guidelines. This grace period is a courtesy, not a victory. I nodded, accepting the compromise. It was not perfect, but it was better than paying $500 for no reason. As we left the community center, Tom congratulated me. You handled that well, he said. HOAs can be tough, but you stood your ground. Emma and I went home feeling cautiously optimistic. The fine was gone, and I had 60 days to deal with the bulbs if the guidelines were formally changed. I figured I could live with that, but Patricia Pemberton was not finished with me. 2 weeks later, I received another notice. This time, I was being fined for having a trash can visible from the street. According to the notice, trash cans must be stored out of sight except on collection days. The problem was, I had put my trash can out the night before collection, which was allowed. The notice claimed I had left it out for 2 days after collection, which I absolutely had not. I checked my doorbell camera footage. Sure enough, I had wheeled the trash can back to my side yard within 3 hours of collection. The footage was time-stamped and clear. This was not a mistake. This was retaliation. I sent the video footage to the HOA office with a request to dismiss the fine. A week passed with no response. Then, I received a notice that the fine had been increased to $250 for failure to comply. I called the HOA office and spoke to Susan, the secretary. She seemed flustered when I explained the situation. "I will bring this to Patricia's attention," she said, "but she handles most of the violation enforcement personally." "Can I speak to her directly?" I asked. "She is very busy." "I recommend emailing her." I sent a detailed email to Patricia with the video evidence attached. Her response came the next day. "Video evidence is inconclusive. The fine stands." Inconclusive. The video clearly showed the date, time, and my actions. There was nothing inconclusive about it. Emma was ready to go to war. "She is targeting you because you challenged her. This is harassment." I agreed. I decided to document everything meticulously. Every interaction, every notice, every email. If Patricia wanted to play games, I was going to make sure there was a clear record. The notices kept coming. The next week, I was fined for having a garden hose visible in my front yard. The week after that, for a supposedly unkempt lawn, even though I mowed it regularly and it looked identical to my neighbors' yards. Each fine was $250. Each violation was either trivial or completely fabricated. I disputed every single one with evidence. Photos, videos, timestamps, witness statements from neighbors. Patricia rejected them all. Within 2 months, I had accumulated over $1,500 in fines, none of which were legitimate. I stopped paying them, which only led to more threatening letters about liens on my property. That was when I decided to consult an attorney. I found a lawyer named David Morrison who specialized in HOA disputes. His office was in downtown Phoenix, and I met with him on a Tuesday morning. I brought all my documentation, the notices, the evidence, the correspondence, everything. David reviewed the materials carefully, taking notes as he read. After about 30 minutes, he looked up at me. "This is textbook harassment," he said. "The pattern is clear. You challenged the HOA president, won a partial victory, and now she is retaliating by hitting you with frivolous violations. Arizona law specifically prohibits this kind of behavior from HOAs. What can I do?" I asked. "We can file a lawsuit for harassment and seek an injunction to stop the fines," David explained. "We can also request that the court order the HOA to establish clear, enforceable guidelines and follow proper procedures. Given the evidence you have, I think we have a strong case." "Will this be expensive?" I asked, concerned about legal fees on top of everything else. "I will be honest, it will not be cheap. But if we win, we can request that the HOA pay your legal fees. Plus, you might be entitled to damages. This kind of retaliation is taken seriously by judges." I discussed it with Emma that evening. We decided to move forward. The principle of the matter was more important than the money at this point. Patricia was abusing her power, and if we did not stop her, she would do the same thing to other homeowners. David filed the lawsuit in Maricopa County Superior Court. The complaint outlined the pattern of harassment, the lack of proper enforcement procedures, and the retaliatory nature of the fines. We requested an injunction, monetary damages, and a court order requiring the HOA to reform its practices. The lawsuit was served to the HOA a week later. Patricia's response was swift and predictable. I received a notice that I was being fined for creating discord in the community by filing a lawsuit. The fine was $1,000. David laughed when I showed him the notice. "She just handed us even more evidence. You cannot fine someone for exercising their legal rights. This is going to make our case even stronger." The court scheduled a hearing for the injunction request. In the meantime, David issued a cease and desist letter to the HOA, demanding that all fines against me be suspended pending the outcome of the lawsuit. Patricia ignored it. Another fine arrived, this time for supposedly parking my car on the street overnight, which was never a rule in our community. I had never even seen it mentioned in any guideline. The hearing took place on a Monday morning in late September. David, Emma, and I sat on one side of the courtroom. Patricia was there with the HOA's attorney, a stern-looking man named Gerald Fitzpatrick. The other board members were noticeably absent. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Helen Morneau, reviewed the preliminary filings and then asked each side to present their arguments. David went first. He laid out the timeline of events, starting with the original Porch light fine and showing how it escalated into a pattern of harassment. He presented the evidence methodically: the video footage, the photos, the inconsistent enforcement, the retaliatory fines. He pointed out that other homeowners had similar or identical situations, but had not been fined, demonstrating selective enforcement. Gerald, the HOA's attorney, argued that the HOA had the right to enforce its guidelines and that Mr. Xander was a problematic resident who refused to comply with reasonable requests. Judge Morneau was not impressed. "Counselor, I have reviewed the evidence. Many of these violations appear to be either fabricated or trivial. The timing of these fines, immediately following Mr. Xander's successful appeal, suggests retaliation. Can you explain why your client fined him for filing a lawsuit?" Gerald stammered. "That particular fine was an error in judgment and has been rescinded." "When was it rescinded?" Judge Morneau asked. "This morning," Gerald admitted. The judge raised an eyebrow. "How convenient. Mr. Morrison, do you have evidence of other homeowners with similar situations who were not fined?" David did. He had interviewed several of my neighbors and gathered photos showing trash cans, garden hoses, and other items that matched or exceeded what I had been fined for, none of whom had received violations. Judge Morneau reviewed the photos. Then she addressed Patricia directly. "Miss Pemberton, as HOA president, can you explain the discrepancy in enforcement?" Patricia stood, maintaining her composure. "Your Honor, we enforce violations as they are reported to us. If other homeowners have not been reported, we cannot take action on violations we are unaware of." "Who reported Mr. Xander's violations?" Judge Morneau asked. Patricia hesitated. "I did. As president, I conduct regular inspections of the community. And during these inspections, you did not notice any of the identical violations in Mr. Xander's neighbors' properties." Patricia's facade cracked slightly. "I must have missed them." Judge Morneau leaned back in her chair. "Miss Pemberton, it is clear to me that Mr. Xander has been subjected to selective and retaliatory enforcement. The evidence is overwhelming. I am granting the injunction. All fines against Mr. Xander are hereby suspended pending the outcome of the full trial. Additionally, the HOA is ordered to cease issuing any further violations to Mr. Xander unless they can demonstrate that identical violations by other homeowners are being enforced equally." She continued, "I am also ordering the HOA to conduct an audit of all violations issued in the past year and provide a report to the court demonstrating consistent enforcement. If the pattern of selective enforcement continues, I will consider further sanctions." Patricia looked like she had been slapped. Gerald tried to salvage the situation by requesting a postponement, but Judge Morneau denied it. As we left the courtroom, I felt vindicated. Emma hugged me tightly. David shook my hand. "That went better than I expected," he said. Judge Morneau does not tolerate HOA abuse. But be prepared, this is not over. The trial will take months to get on the calendar and Patricia might try other tactics. He was right. Over the next few weeks, Patricia did try other tactics. She could not find me directly, so she started campaigning to have the board vote me as a nuisance resident and potentially force me to sell my home. It was an obscure provision in the HOA governing documents that had never been used. However, her campaign backfired. Other residents had been watching the situation closely, and many were fed up with Patricia's heavy-handed leadership. A group of homeowners, including Robert and Kelly from the board, started organizing a recall effort. Arizona law allowed for HOA board members to be recalled by a vote of the membership. The group needed signatures from 20% of homeowners to trigger a recall election. They reached that threshold in less than 3 weeks. Patricia fought the recall effort viciously. She sent letters to homeowners claiming the recall was illegal and motivated by a small group of troublemakers. She held emergency board meetings to try to change the recall procedures, but the momentum was against her. The recall election was scheduled for November. Emma and I attended the meeting where the vote would take place. The community center was packed. Over 100 homeowners showed up, far more than had ever attended a regular meeting. The vote was conducted by secret ballot. An independent third party was brought in to count the votes to ensure fairness. The tension in the room was palpable as the ballots were tallied. The results were announced. Patricia Pemberton was recalled by a vote of 78 to 23. She was officially removed as HOA president. The room erupted in applause. Patricia sat stone-faced, then gathered her belongings and walked out without a word. Susan, who had been her ally, also resigned on the spot. Robert was elected as the new president by a unanimous vote of the remaining board members. His first act was to formally apologize to me in front of the entire assembly. "Marcus, on behalf of the board, I want to apologize for how you were treated. The actions taken against you were unjust and do not reflect the values of this community. We will be working to reform our processes and ensure that this never happens again." The room applauded again. Several neighbors came up to me afterward to express their support and share their own stories of unfair treatment under Patricia's leadership. With Patricia gone, the lawsuit became much easier to resolve. Robert and the new board agreed to settle. They dropped all fines against me, paid my legal fees, and agreed to compensate me for the stress and time I had spent fighting the violations. The settlement was $12,000, more than covering David's fees with some left over. More importantly, the board implemented sweeping reforms. They revised the community guidelines to be clearer and more specific, eliminating vague language that could be interpreted arbitrarily. They established a formal appeals process with checks and balances. They created a committee to review all violations before fines were issued, ensuring consistent enforcement. The porch light guideline was revised to explicitly state that both warm white and cool white bulbs were acceptable, as long as they met basic safety and brightness standards. My original lights were grandfathered in without any need for changes, but the story did not end there. A few months after the settlement, I received a call from David Morrison. "Marcus, I thought you should know something. I have been hearing rumors from other attorneys that Patricia Pemberton has been involved in similar situations in other HOAs." "What do you mean?" I asked. "She was president of an HOA in Scottsdale before Riverside Estates. She was pushed out after homeowners complained about similar harassment tactics. Before that, she was on the board of an HOA in Temp. Same pattern. She seems to move from community to community, gets herself elected to positions of power, and then abuses that power until she is forced out. This was disturbing. Is there anything that can be done about it?" "That is the problem with HOAs," David said. There is no central oversight. Each one operates independently. Unless someone files a lawsuit or pursues criminal charges, people like Patricia can keep doing this. Criminal charges, I asked. Is what she did criminal? David paused. Potentially. If it could be proven that she was issuing fines with the intent to harass or extort money from homeowners, that could constitute fraud or abuse of power. But it would be hard to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. The conversation stuck with me. Over the next few weeks, I did some digging. I contacted homeowners from the other communities where Patricia had been involved. Their stories were remarkably similar to mine. Arbitrary fines, retaliatory enforcement, selective targeting of residents who challenged her. One homeowner in Scottsdale, a man named Greg, told me that Patricia had fined him over $4,000 for various made-up violations and had threatened to foreclose on his house. He eventually paid the fines just to make it stop, even though he knew they were unjust. Another homeowner in Temp, a woman named Deanne, said Patricia had targeted her after she questioned the HOA's budget at a meeting. Diane ended up selling her house and moving to avoid the harassment. The more I learned, the more convinced I became that Patricia's behavior was not just unethical but potentially criminal. I compiled all the information and brought it to David. "This is a pattern," I said. "She has been doing this for years across multiple communities. People have lost thousands of dollars. Some have been forced to sell their homes. This is more than just bad HOA management. This is systemic fraud." David reviewed the information I had gathered. "You might be right," he said. "But to pursue criminal charges, we would need law enforcement to get involved, and they typically do not take HOA disputes seriously unless there is clear evidence of criminal intent." "What if we approach the Arizona Attorney General's office?" I suggested. "They have a consumer fraud division." "This seems like it would fall under their jurisdiction." David considered this. "It is worth a try. Let me draft a complaint and see if they will investigate." We submitted a detailed complaint to the Arizona Attorney General's office, including all the evidence I had gathered and statements from multiple homeowners across different communities. We argued that Patricia Pemberton had engaged in a pattern of fraud and abuse of power, using her positions in HOAs to harass and extort money from homeowners. I did not expect much to come of it. Government agencies are notoriously slow, and HOA issues are not typically high priority. But 3 months later, I received a call from an investigator named Sarah Chen from the Attorney General's office. "Mr. Xander, we have reviewed your complaint regarding Patricia Pemberton. We believe there is sufficient evidence to open a formal investigation. We would like to interview you and the other homeowners who have been affected." I was stunned. "You are actually investigating this?" "Yes. Based on the information you provided, it appears that Ms. Pemberton has engaged in a pattern of behavior that may constitute fraud under Arizona law. We take consumer protection seriously, and if she has been systematically abusing her authority to extract money from homeowners, that is something we need to address." Over the next several months, Sarah and her team conducted a thorough investigation. They interviewed dozens of homeowners, reviewed financial records from multiple HOAs, and examined the pattern of fines and violations Patricia had issued over the years. What they discovered was even worse than I had imagined. Patricia had not just been harassing homeowners. She had been embezzling money from HOA accounts. The excessive fines she issued were padding the HOA budgets, and she had been siphoning off funds through fake vendor contracts and inflated expense reports. Across 3 different communities, she had stolen over $200,000. The investigation culminated in Patricia's arrest on multiple charges: fraud, embezzlement, and abuse of power. The arrest made local news, and several homeowners, including myself, were interviewed by reporters. The trial took place the following spring. Emma and I attended, along with many other homeowners Patricia had victimized. The evidence presented by the prosecution was overwhelming. Bank records, emails, testimony from forensic accountants, all pointing to a deliberate scheme to defraud homeowners associations. Patricia's defense attorney tried to argue that she had made bookkeeping errors, not committed fraud. But the pattern was too clear, and the jury did not buy it. Patricia Pemberton was found guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to 5 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution to the HOAs she had defrauded. The judge, in delivering the sentence, specifically mentioned the harm she had caused to individual homeowners who had trusted her to manage their communities fairly. As Emma and I left the courthouse that day, I felt a sense of closure I had not expected. What had started as a ridiculous fine over porch lights had uncovered a much larger pattern of corruption and abuse. Patricia would no longer be able to terrorize homeowners, and the communities she had harmed would begin to recover. Back in Riverside Estates, life returned to normal. The new board under Robert's leadership was fair and reasonable. The community actually felt like a community again, not a police state. Neighbors talked to each other without fear of being reported for trivial violations. People took pride in their homes without worrying about arbitrary fines. My porch lights, the warm ones that had started this entire saga, continued to shine every evening. They were a reminder that standing up for what is right, even over something small, can lead to meaningful change. One evening, about a year after Patricia's conviction, I was sitting on my porch with Emma, enjoying the cool Arizona evening. A new family had just moved in across the street, and the husband came over to introduce himself. "Hi, I am Michael," he said, shaking my hand. "We just moved in last week. I heard you were the one who took down the crazy HOA president. I just wanted to say thank you. That is one of the reasons we felt comfortable buying here. The HOA has a good reputation now." I smiled. "Just did what needed to be done. Welcome to the neighborhood." As Michael walked back to his house, Emma leaned against my shoulder. "You know, when that first letter came about the porch lights, I never imagined it would lead to all this." "Neither did I admitted. "But I am glad we did not just roll over and pay the fine. Sometimes you have to fight, even when it seems easier not to." The warm glow from my porch lights illuminated the front yard, standard and beautiful, just as they always had been. In the distance, I could see other homes with their own lights, warm and cool, all coexisting peacefully. That was how it should be. A community with room for individuality, governed by fairness, not fear. I thought about all the homeowners who had shared their stories with me during the investigation, people who had suffered in silence under Patricia's regime. Many of them had received restitution from the settlement funds. More importantly, they had their peace of mind back. The legal system, for all its flaws, had worked. Patricia was held accountable. The HOA was reformed. Justice, in a very real sense, had been served. As the weeks and months passed, I occasionally received emails from homeowners in other communities facing similar issues. They had read about the case and wanted advice on how to handle their own HOA problems. I did my best to help, connecting them with David Morrison and sharing the strategies that had worked for me. Some of those situations resolved quickly, with HOAs backing down once they realized the homeowners were serious about fighting back. Others required legal action. But in every case, the homeowners felt empowered to stand up for themselves, and that made all the difference. David Morrison even started specializing more heavily in HOA law, recognizing that there was a real need for attorneys who understood the complexities of these disputes and were willing to take on abusive boards. He told me that my case had inspired him to focus his practice on helping homeowners. The reforms implemented by the Riverside Estates board became a model for other communities. Robert was invited to speak at HOA conferences about best practices for governance and enforcement. He always credited the homeowners who had stood up to Patricia as the real heroes, but he did an excellent job leading the community through the transition. One particularly satisfying development came about 6 months after Patricia's conviction. The Arizona State Legislature passed a new law strengthening protections for homeowners against HOA abuse. The law required HOAs to have clear, written guidelines, consistent enforcement policies, and accessible appeals processes. It also established penalties for board members who engaged in retaliatory or discriminatory enforcement. The law was nicknamed the Porch Light Protection Act by some local media, though its official name was much more bureaucratic. I was invited to the signing ceremony at the state capitol, where I got to meet the legislators who had sponsored the bill. They told me that my case, along with others that had come to light during Patricia's trial, had been instrumental in building support for the legislation. Standing in the Capitol building, watching the governor sign the law, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. What had started as a personal dispute over light bulbs had led to systemic change that would protect countless homeowners across Arizona. Emma took a photo of me standing next to the governor, both of us holding a copy of the newly signed law. That photo ended up framed on our living room wall, a reminder of what ordinary people can achieve when they refuse to accept injustice. Life in Riverside Estates continued to improve. The community held its first neighborhood block party in years, a casual gathering where people could meet their neighbors without the oppressive atmosphere that had existed under Patricia's leadership. There was laughter, good food, and a sense of camaraderie that had been missing. Kids played in the streets without parents worrying about getting fined for chalk drawings on the sidewalk. People decorated their homes for holidays without fear of violating some obscure guideline. The community felt alive in a way it had not before. I even joined the Architectural Review Committee, wanting to be part of the solution and ensure that the reforms were implemented thoughtfully. We worked to update the community guidelines, making them clear and reasonable while still maintaining the overall aesthetic quality of the neighborhood. One of our first actions was to formally approve both warm and cool white lighting for all exterior fixtures, explicitly stating that homeowners had the choice. We also established guidelines for the committee itself, including requirements for consistent enforcement and documentation of decisions. The committee meetings were surprisingly enjoyable. We reviewed requests for home improvements, landscaping changes, and other modifications. But instead of looking for reasons to say no, we approached each request with a mindset of finding ways to say yes while maintaining community standards. It was a completely different philosophy from what had existed before. Robert proved to be an excellent HOA president. He was transparent, communicative, and genuinely cared about the community. He sent monthly newsletters updating residents on HOA activities, finances, and upcoming projects. The budget was published online for anyone to review. Board meetings were recorded and made available to residents who could not attend in person. Trust was rebuilt slowly but steadily. Residents who had been disengaged started participating again. Attendance at board meetings increased. People volunteered for committees and community events. Riverside Estates became the kind of neighborhood people actually wanted to live in, not just a place where they happened to own property. Emma and I settled into a comfortable rhythm. We made friends with neighbors, hosted barbecues, and enjoyed our home without the constant stress of wondering what violation notice would arrive next. The porch lights continued to cast their warm glow every evening, a symbol of both the struggle and the victory. One Saturday afternoon, I was mowing the lawn when an older couple walking by stopped to chat. They introduced themselves as Helen and Walter, longtime residents who lived a few streets over. "We wanted to thank you," Helen said. "We were so close to selling our house and leaving because of all the nonsense with Patricia. But you stood up to her, and it made a real difference. We love this neighborhood, and now we can actually enjoy living here again." Walter nodded in agreement. "What you did took courage. A lot of people were too afraid to challenge her. We are grateful you did." Their words meant more to me than any settlement check or news article. Real people had been helped. That was what mattered. As summer turned to fall and fall turned to winter, life continued peacefully. The holidays came and went. Emma and I celebrated our second anniversary in the house, reflecting on how much had happened in such a short time. The porch lights, those standard warm fixtures that had started everything, continued to shine faithfully. They welcomed us home each evening and greeted visitors with a warm glow. They were just lights, nothing special or remarkable. But they had become a symbol of something much larger, a reminder that standing up for principle, even in small matters, could lead to meaningful change. I never expected that buying a house in a planned community would lead to a legal battle, an investigation, and ultimately prison time for a corrupt HOA president. I certainly never expected that a dispute over light bulbs would result in new state legislation. But that is exactly what happened, and I would not change any of it. The experience taught me valuable lessons about power, accountability, and community. It showed me that ordinary people can make a difference when they refuse to accept injustice. It demonstrated that the legal system, despite its flaws, can work when people are willing to use it properly. Most importantly, it reminded me that home is more than just a building. It is a place where you should feel safe, comfortable, and free to be yourself. No HOA, no matter how powerful it might seem, should take that away from anyone. As I sit on my porch on this quiet evening, the warm light illuminating the pages of the book I am reading, I feel content. The battle is over. The community is healed. Justice was served. And my porch lights, those perfectly standard, perfectly appropriate warm white fixtures, continue to shine exactly as they should. In the end, that is all I ever wanted. To live peacefully in my home with my wife, in a community that treats its residents fairly. It should not have required a lawsuit, an investigation, and a criminal trial to achieve that. But sometimes the right outcome requires fighting for it, and I am glad I did. The warm glow of my porch light stands as a testament to that fight and to the victory that followed. Every evening, as they automatically turn on at dusk, I am reminded that standing up for what is right, no matter how small the issue might seem, is always worth it. Because sometimes, the smallest issues reveal the biggest problems, and addressing them can change everything for the better.